with us today Richard Medley of many famed incidents, including the one in the Medley Global case, which was in the reading assignment for today. Now, is Tom Smythe here? There you are. What do you think of the idea that somebody like Medley here could make a lot of money by selling economically valuable information?
It's great, but your question to me was also about the SEC.
Yep.
And I think...
Well, let's tell, you should tell all them what the...
Right, so there's this idea that maybe the SEC should be asked to regulate flows of information as well as flows of capital, and especially to regulate people who are making so much money off of flows of information. So I think letting the SEC regulate these sort of global informational transactions is sort of like letting a team of about a dozen lifeguards patrol the entire Atlantic. Right? They have no idea what they're doing in the first place. They can't catch Bernie Madoff. How are they supposed to know what's what's good and what's bad in the world of information?
That's both a good and interesting answer. I forgot my little card, but I asked 2 or 3 other people to think about this little. Fess up. Anybody else have a warm call going? Yeah, here we go.
I was asked whether what Medley Global Advisors did should be illegal. And I think absolutely not. If you believe that...
Can all of you hear? You've got to talk a lot louder.
If you believe that markets are, one of the main purposes of markets is to aggregate information, then making something like Medley Global Advisors illegal is depriving the markets of information and sort of making them less efficient, which isn't a goal I think anyone would want.
Okay, so the answer given, was the answer clear in the back of the room? Audible? Are you at all troubled by the fact that people who buy information from Medley enjoy a huge advantage over dumb guys like you and me?
Well, anyone is able to buy information from Medley, as far as I could tell from the case. I mean, it wasn't like he was discriminating against people. It's just you had to pay enough. The reason, though, it's actually important that it at least goes to the people it ended up going to, as opposed to you and me, is because they're the people who are more likely to move the markets and sort of have that. They have the market power to incorporate that information into prices in a way that you or I don't.
Okay. Richard? This is Richard Medley. He's a 30-some-year friend. Please welcome him warmly. I hardly know where to begin about Richard. I first met him when he was the smartest kid coming out of Ohio State University, and the object was to get him to come to Yale to do his PhD. He came to Yale, but in the midst of doing his PhD, got interested in having a career in the real world. And it took 20 years? 23 years later, after he was rich enough to afford to take the time to write a dissertation, he came back and wrote it, and it was about his adventure with George Soros.
That is bullshit. The real story is, the real story is, he was my dissertation advisor. And I said, what I want to do is a 9-page dissertation premised on formal logic. And it'll be a complete formal logic thing that will disprove the ability to justify private rights to property once there's a division of labor within a society. Naturally, I went on to become a hedge fund manager. But
at his 40th birthday, I printed T-shirts with
entire dissertation
the entire dissertation on the front.
So my guide, my counselor, puts me in a position where the dean of the graduate school says to me, I don't give a fuck how smart this is. No one's graduating with a 9-page dissertation from Yale, and that's that. To which I maturely responded, I quit.
Okay. You get the flavor of this. From an incomplete PhD in political science, Richard goes off to be chief economist of the Senate Banking Committee. Am I right?
No, House Banking Committee.
House Banking Committee.
And only in Washington could you, with an incomplete PhD in political philosophy, become the chief economist.
Only if there's a certain blarney involved, I believe. So Richard, yeah, what was the next step in the career then?
Well, then
after that?
then I became the chief of staff for the Senate Democrats, and then was Geraldine Furrow's speechwriter when she ran for vice
You
president.
did a great job with that.
I did a great job in all of these things. Democrats lost the majority in both the House and the Senate. I'm literally the word. If you have a friend who wants to run for office, you can pay me to be against him or her, and they will win.
And SMIC Medley came next.
After that, yeah.
Give us the summary of SMIC Medley.
Well, the idea of that was we actually held a couple of conferences called congressional summits on the dollar and other things like that, where we got congressmen and legislators and finance officials around the world together with business people. And what we realized was that there was no intersection. People who were in finance just didn't understand the political world and vice versa. And this is a long time ago. This was in '85. So you were just beginning to have international capital markets flow. And the need for that was quite extraordinary at that time. And so we started a business that actually grew out of the conference, out of realizing in the conference. And then I ran that until I went with Soros.
And there was a pivotal connection. Was it Senator Bradley who wanted you to alter the invitation list to one of these?
At one of our first conferences, it was sold out, and Bradley said, I want you to invite a friend of mine, and I said, no, I can't. He said, well, go look at the list and see who actually is running this, you or me. And I said, okay, so we can have one person. And he said, well, I want you to invite George Soros. And we got talking. He was writing his first book, the first of several unintelligible books. And
he is a terrible writer.
Well, he like me, didn't finish, but he never went back to finish his PhD. So he's plagued by that at 77 still, that he didn't finish his PhD. So.
Never too late.
No, I imagine he could get it wherever he wanted.
I think he could get one without actually writing a dissertation.
And so then he asked me to come and join him as a partner, which I did, and it was a very Soros move. This was in 1987, 86, 87, and he said, I want you to come. You've never traded before in your life, but I want you to learn how to trade, and I'll give you $100 million. Which doesn't sound like a lot of money now.
Sounds like a lot of money to me still.
but back then was I mean, you would know it was almost an unthinkable amount of money, and luckily I did that for 10 years, and only after I resigned to come here to finish my PhD did he tell me that if I'd ever lost more than 10%, he was going to fire me. And it was a good piece of information to have kept hidden from me, because I would have been so frozen up like this, I would have never been able to trade. And then I came here, finished my PhD, and went on to start Medley Global Advisors.
Okay, and let's get to the startup of Medley Global Advisors in Lower Manhattan.
By the way, he shouldn't be this cocky, because he's from Indiana. And I don't know if anyone knows what Ohio State did to Indiana this weekend, but it was not pretty.
What sport was that?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Only Indiana could ask that question. So go ahead.
So I remember MGA when it was in a huge loft space in Lower Manhattan. Indoor basketball, weight room, all that stuff.
Massage. We had massage.
And massage.
Yeah.
Tell us about that startup.
Well, after I left here, I decided people wanted me to come back and join the hedge fund world, and I really wanted to do a news organization that served the hedge fund community and the investment banking community, and that said, we can provide a level of intelligence that will be worth paying a relatively extraordinary amount of money per month, which was at that time $15,000 a month. which is, slightly more than the Times. And our proposition was we could make it worth your while. That if you paid us this amount of money, we would make you more, so much more than that every year that you would renew. There were two things about that, and if you, I don't know if the logo is on the case study, but the logo was a kind of crosshair. And the reason for that was, in order to make that worthwhile for our clients, we needed to have both accuracy. That is, we needed to be right, not 70% of the time, but about 90% of the time. And I'll go into why that's true in a minute. On top of that, it needed to be relevant. So you needed to hit the crosshair of accuracy and relevance. Because as you know very well, if you get information that's accurate but not relevant, who cares? If you get it that's relevant and not accurate, it's probably even worse. But without those two, you couldn't put on enough trades to make the money. So we originally, when we started the company, we actually thought if we were right 75, 80% of the time, that would be enough. Because if you're right in trading, if you're a trader and you're right on 75% of your trades, you're retired like George. It's just that's a very high number. But what we realized is we needed to be right more like 90% of the time. And the reason for that is simple. In order to make money off of our intelligence, you needed to be able to put on positions based on, and you needed to take a lot of comfort in what we said was going to be true. And if you didn't believe that with a very high degree of confidence, you weren't going to put on a big enough position to make enough money out of that to justify the cost of the service. And so we did a lot of, luckily computers had really, this is, again, 95 when I started this. So, when we first started, just to give you an idea, you guys were not even born then, but in 95, when we first started the company, we had 165 fax servers in our office because people needed the information at the same time. And so we had to have a different fax line for every one of our clients. And naturally, the internet came and rescued our business model with email. But the idea of being wrong became really anathema in the company. And that meant that we were much more likely to hold a story if we didn't know it was right, as much as we could know it was right. But we also had to get it out before the market knew it was happening. Because if it's out, if Bloomberg's written it, it's worth Bloomberg prices, or the Times or something like that. So you were dancing always on a kind of a thin edge, and that was the nature of the company. You were every day. It was, what are we going to know today, or what are we going to know during this week that will help make our clients money? And it was in commodities, currencies, bonds, were our stock and trade. To go to the SEC question, because this is a question that believe me, we lawyered up on a lot, and I've been asked about that all the time. There are no insider trading rules for anything except stocks. And the reason is simple, and I'll tell you, I'll give you a perfect example that happened to us just 2 weeks ago. 2 months ago. We had very good, turned out to be correct, intelligence that the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they produced an annual report to the president. And they were producing the report to the president on threats, on national threats. And they had decided to name Mexico as the most likely failed state in the world. Now, failed state has a technical meaning. It means you do not have governance. The old rule of having control of the force of law is gone. And for the Joint Chiefs of Staff to say that about a country, especially one relatively close to us, it was a big deal. And so we thought this would, and we knew when it was coming out.
Now, how would you have acquired information like this?
Well, I'm not telling you that. But we knew when it was coming out, and then we knew when it was going to come out publicly. And so we put on positions betting that the peso would devalue versus the Brazilian real. And the reason we did that is because Mexico has a much higher interest rate than we do. And there's a thing called carry, and it was a lot cheaper to fund it in real than in the dollar. So the news comes out. It's on the front page of the New York Times. You can go, it's all over. You can look it up. It's public information now. And the peso strengthens versus the real. I'm stunned. I mean, also, I've lost a lot of money. But I'm stunned because Brazil's done brilliantly during the recession. It's done a great job and has stayed very solid. This thing should have been devastating to the peso. Why wasn't it? Because PIMCO, I think it's the largest asset manager in the world in California, had decided to put on a program of buying Mexican bonds that started the same day that this report came out. Now, they didn't know the report was coming out, and I didn't know PIMCO was, no, that would have been insider information, but that would have been illegal. But I didn't know PIMCO was buying. So I put on a trade based on this intelligence that was completely accurate, and it worked the opposite. It hurt me. That's very different than what the SEC is trying to regulate, which is if I know the president of GM and he tells me, God, we're going to miss our earnings by 15 cents this quarter, there's only one way the market's going to react to that. There's 100% certainty. And so that's why I think in part your analogy is right, that trying to control the ocean with 12 lifeguards. I mean, if you can't control Madoff, how do you control everybody else? I think that's probably the realistic explanation, but the kind of logic and the theoretic, because they've gone down this road a couple times, and they've always decided not to do it for exactly this reason, that it's not considered material inside information, because something else can always happen. You don't have the same kind of control, currencies, bonds, and commodities, as you do over stock prices with the information from the. In fact, when we took the pound out of the ERM in '92, we went over to do a kind of a damage control in Britain because we were very worried that the Bank of England might be upset with us and could pull credit lines or hurt us in other ways. So we went over to do damage control, and then we held a series of press conferences. And we were at one press conference, and this guy from the Evening Standard said to Soros, in that very snarky British way, he said, Mr. Soros, do you ever trade on non-public information? And he said, I would never trade without it. And it's really an approach to trading. And by the way, there are many other approaches to macro trading beside intelligence-based. There's quantitative approach, there's a trend approach, there's technical, a purely technical graph or chart-driven approach. But the people who trade it on macro intelligence and macro information, this is their edge. If they don't have an edge on the intelligence, if they're just sitting there in front of their Bloombergs or Reuters or whatever, reading the same headlines everyone else is, they just don't make money because you're just not going to be that much smarter than everybody else in the market once the information is public. So that was the juice of the product, and the key to making it really work was being accurate, being relevant, and I didn't spend any time on the relevancy was really important, and we created an internal team of former traders in each of the areas we covered who would be in touch with the market so they would know what the market was seeking to know the answer to, and they would know what was already in the market. Because what you didn't want to do is put out a bunch of reports that were already in the market, because then people didn't open it up and didn't trade on it, and then you started to lose your edge and your value to them. So that feedback loop from the former traders into our content people around the world. And when I sold the company, we had about 350 content people around the world and about 250 clients. And that feedback loop was critical because it focused our research. It focused the kind of questions we were asking and the people to whom we were asking those questions.
How'd you put this thing together? Recruiting people, creating a corporate culture or a company culture, staying out front of it symbolically without having to actually do all the blocking and tackling, which is, I mean, the blocking and tackling is what eventually got you tired of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I'm not, as you know, a blocking and tackling kind of guy. The thing is, when you line those crosshairs up, because also we were dealing with public events. So it wasn't like something that was going to stay secret, who really ordered, the My Lai massacre. It wasn't stuff buried in the archives. This was going to happen. This was going to happen or not happen. Is where, the Fed's going to do this, or the Bank of England's going to do that, or we're going to invade Iraq, sorry, that's later. Iraq, on this in this period, and do this and that and the other. These are just publicly knowable events. They're falsifiable in the best possible Popperian sense of that word. And
Sounds like you got a PhD at Yale. Popperian sense.
It's more sense than I have. But because they were that, and because the price point was so high, and that was an important part of this, it wasn't something. There are other people who do similar things. Eurasia, places like that. They charge, what are they, like $3,000 a month or something, like between $1,500 and $3,000 a month. A lot of people take it just because it's actually fun to read. I mean, Gartman and people like that. You just subscribe because it's a fun read in the morning. We were so far above that, unless we were making you money, you just weren't going to subscribe to us. So what it did was it aligned all of the interests inside the company. If you wanted to work at this company, and and we hired mainly ex-reporters and ex-government officials, actually only ex-reporters and ex-government officials. And we would pay them $250,000 apiece, which, if you were a reporter, was kind of what you earned for your career. And then bonuses on top of that. So you had a lot of incentive to make things good, make them right, make them fast, make them well written. And we also added something that I still think was a very important element, which was we were just smart asses. I mean, we just would write things in a very smart ass tone and be very cocky about it. And we would never cite sources, which helped us enormously in terms of keeping sources. Because we never said, U.S. White House officials say this. We just said, here's what's going to happen. And clients either took that as true, or they didn't re-up. And if they did, then the guys who'd leaked this to us, people who'd leaked this to us, were very glad, because no one could trace it back to where. I mean, in fact, to tell you the truth, there were times, and you need to edit this one out. There were times.
Wait a minute. Let's actually make sure we know the rules. Can we snip a piece of film out or not? Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
There were times where we would get information from, say, a ECB official, and we would actually cite a Fed official, just to throw it, because it didn't matter, but if it was really sensitive and they were worried about it, we would actually throw it so completely off track because that was unlike a paper, unlike the Journal or the Times or places like that have to worry about that. All we had to worry about was whether we were right or wrong. And if we were right, then people did care. If we were wrong, they cared a lot.
Okay, so Medley gets to the point where he's no longer interested in running MGA. Tell us about how you managed to capture value from this thing and walk away.
Sleight of hand.
Sleight of hand.
So basically, we got to the point where you've all heard of this boring. As I've said to Doug for years now, I never even thought about or understood that S-curve that they talk about in business school until I was at the top of it, and then I got it instantly and quickly. The thing is that we were charging so much money. unless you were a hedge fund or working for a proprietary trading team in a bank, or were just nuts about politics and geopolitics. You just wouldn't pay $15,000 a month for this service. And we got to the point where the 30 of the 30, back then there were actually investment banks, and 30 of the 30 top investment banks were subscribers to us in multiple locations, in Tokyo, in London, and each one had a different subscription. New York, and the FX teams had a different subscription than the fixed income teams, who had a different subscription than the oil teams. So, and then of the hedge funds, there was not a significant hedge fund that traded on this kind of information that wasn't that traded exclusively on this kind of information that wasn't a client of ours. And I realized that basically all we could do was hold our own. Now, I'm just that then gets boring. And then the challenge was, how do you sell a company with your name, where your name is actually the kind of commodity in the thing, and expect to walk away having sold 100% of it and walk away from it? And so I had to spend about 1.5 years proving that I was useless, which turned out to be a lot easier than I'd hoped, but I managed it. And so that meant for 1.5 years, during which time, by the way, it was driving my wife crazy. She was like, just put on a suit and get out of the house. I don't, because she said I would marry you for life, not for lunch. And I think that's right. So I had to go and stay away from the office for 1 year, fully on 1 year, except when I came in to pitch with people who were coming in to think about buying the company. I couldn't make a phone call about intelligence. I couldn't make a phone call on sales. I couldn't go on a sales call. I couldn't do anything. And I did that for 1 year, and we continued to grow slightly, which was good. We kind of hit our projections for the 2005 year when I sold it. And then, we had about 4 different bidders, and 2 of them got into a real, we really want this kind of war, which is what you always need at least 2. And they got into it, and eventually Boston Ventures and then Goldman Sachs ended up buying the company from me, and I left it.
Cool. Richard is one caricature of Richard's career is serial obsession.
I would say character, not caricature.
Okay, character. It is being obsessed with one thing and then another and then another. And it, so what's next? Well, the next is when it comes time to write the case you're reading, Jan Ilias and I go down to New York to visit Richard. And he's arranged lunch at Mr. Medley's table in the Four Seasons. And Henry Kissinger's table is next to it, and so on. And he's showing off, just.
Right, but by the way, I'm to the left of him, so that's important.
And he's showing off, and worse than that, he claims it's a business strategy.
Which
and
it is.
He's paying, can I say the number?
Yeah, you can.
He's paying $160 a square foot for the 33rd floor of the Seagram's building, straight above the restaurant. And that same space now goes for?
Well, no, unfortunately not that space, but another space would go for 60 right now.
Other space in the building is as low as 60. So Medley Capital sounds like a very different enterprise than Medley Global Advisors.
So I decided to go back to the hedge fund business. And one of the things that I learned in traveling to hedge fund after hedge fund after hedge fund over the 10 years I had MGA was that where you were mattered to investors. Now, where I was at MGA was, no one came down to see us. It was the coolest thing. It was the 6th floor loft in Tribeca with pine floors. It was an old furniture factory with oriental rugs on it, and you would walk through. It was 35,000 square feet. The day after 9/11, by the way, unlike the Seagram's building move, the day after 9/11, doubled up the years on our lease at half the price because everyone thought downtown was finished at that time. But it was so cool. But no one cared what it looked like, except us, and we loved it. The Seagram's building was a strategic choice because when investors walk in and you're on the 33rd floor of, it's one of the two prime buildings in New York, and because fundraising for hedge funds has become so institutional, you can watch it. You get off the elevator, there's the name right there. You watch people check off, 5 of the 15 boxes that they're asking about as an institutional investor. You've got presence, you've obviously got, size, what you're doing, you're of institutional scale, blah, 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 blah. So you end up making this crazy decision on real estate. But when you back it out, what sounds like crazy, when you back it out, all it takes is another, I can't remember right now, there's another 18 million AUM to pay off the difference between that and a kind of grade B office. Now, 5 years from now, we may choose that it may not matter because we'll be big enough and things like that we won't have to spend the money. But as a startup hedge fund, particularly in 2005, early 2006, it was really important to have institutional presence, and so we made that decision. We now have the whole floor, but.
Okay. Now, my model would predict that you're getting bored with this by about now.
Well, the decision on this was to hire to do a bunch of different strategies under one structure, Medley Capital. As you can see, I'm very creative about my naming of things, and. So I have I hired a team that did what's called asset-backed lending, which is it's an old-fashioned bank, is effectively the way to talk about it. And I hired a team. We took over A.W. Jones, which was the first hedge fund in history, actually celebrating its 60th anniversary today. It was started in not today, but this year, started in 1949. And the reason I acquired that is I wanted something in the hedge fund industry that was older than me. And it was the only option. And then I started a macro fund about a year ago, old-fashioned, going back to the Soros roots, old-fashioned information edge trading. And I had a team. We brought a team over from J.P. Morgan to do that, and they've now been doing that since July of last year, so a little over a year at this point. And as Doug said, now all those teams are in place. Those are the strategies we have. We've raised plenty of money for all of them, and now I'm bored.
You're bored.
Yep.
So, are you looking at Medley Global with regret by now? Is there sort of nostalgia as one might have for an old girlfriend or something like that?
No, I'm actually what I'm doing is I'm taking advantage of the last of the kind of decay of the ability of the New York Police Department. I'm buying up drug corners in Harlem. It's working pretty well.
He's kidding. Say you're kidding.
I'm kidding. Well, since I sold MGA, what I didn't foresee, and I don't want to take any, and wouldn't take any credit for this, what I didn't foresee is that the hedge fund industry kind of had a rough patch, and as you know, in 07, 08, a very rough patch, and a little bit more in 09. So a lot of hedge funds have gone out of business. A lot of proprietary trading teams, as investment banks came under the rule of the Federal Reserve and other central banks, a lot of them shed their proprietary trading teams. So as I said, we still probably have, MGA still probably has, 80, 90% of the potential market, but the denominator has shrunk rapidly. So they're looking around to see whether, we're talking now to see whether I should go in and reacquire MGA, but with a lower price for the product, and thus a much broader audience and a different kind of concept that would spread the news, be less intensely market focused and more focused on kind of being ahead of the news for people who really cared about accuracy and being ahead of the news. And so as we're looking into that now, we're working on that business model now.
You want to speculate any further on that subject about what the direction it might take could be and so on?
No, thanks.
Okay. So,
I do want to talk about one thing, though, which is that if, and I know he doesn't want me to talk about this, but one thing that is important to think of, that I've been thinking a lot about is if the Obama administration were a business, how would you handle where it is right now? Because this is a business that I was involved in a lot of discussions early on about going down, decided not to do it, that came in with a very strong decision to do one thing in the first year, which was to rescue the economy, to step on the gas further than President Bush had, and who gets, by the way, he and Paulson get way too little credit for what they did. But they had a really great plan to say, we're going to spend the year doing economic recovery, nothing else. And then toward the end of the year, if it works, I mean, if it doesn't work, you know, we're going to teach people how to build thatch roofed huts. But if it does work, we're going to take credit for it. And we're going to put an enormous amount of stock in our larder to be able to move forward with the big structural issues. I wrote a speech for when he gave that joint address. I wrote a speech that Rahm did not appreciate that I sent in about what his speech would have been like had he done what he said he was going to do. By the way, this wasn't my advice. This was their decision. And he would have been able to stand there and say, you know, we've got the recovery that we hope for. It's slow. It'll take time, blah, blah, blah. But we've made it happen. And now let's move on to the structural issues affecting America, health care, greenhouse emissions, this, that, and the other. Let's move on to structural issues because we've dealt with the crisis. And he would have been still at 65, 68% approval ratings. Just would have been a very different thing. But now he's not. And he's got Afghanistan, which is a huge, huge problem for him. He's obviously got healthcare has fallen apart. He's got cap and trade, which isn't going to happen this year. He's got a highway bill that he can't get through that is really pissing off the left of his party. And he's considerably alienated both the left of his party and the right of the country, and given them reason to have a pretty significant criticism. Now, the interesting thing would be if you were Obama, and this would be just something to be, I don't know the answer, but if you were Obama and you were running this as a business, that is, get back to something that makes sure you don't lose the majority in 2010, what would you start to do? What would you focus on?
let's ask somebody. Who knows the answer to that? What should the Obama people be doing if they don't want to lose their majority in the House of Representatives? This, of course, is not a course about political. Oh, there we go. Can we get? Yep. We have an answer in the back.
Pull a Clinton, triangulate. I mean, it worked before, it'll probably work again. Dick Morris's strategy was very, very popular, and it's what secured Bill Clinton's 96 victory when in 95 it was not looking likely.
So you're saying just let it happen?
No, I'm saying triangulate. Basically, stop pushing for what could be seen as massive structural reforms and go for very slight reforms, claim that they're massive, tout them, and actually make them be positive changes. The problem with massive shifts is that they always have unintended consequences, whereas a minor marginal shift can probably just have purely good consequences. You know exactly what the trade-offs are. Whereas if you create a single payer or fundamentally alter doctor compensation in America, who knows what will happen? You could see a 10% drop-off in med school graduation or something like that. And that's something that you definitely don't want to be blamed for come 2011, 2012.
So and I think that's a great solution. You're 100% right. But Clinton ran his administration, except for the health care reform, as a small, kind of a small change thing, right? I mean, he made minor changes and it was lucky because he had the tailwind of the economy the entire time. Do you remember the first really big, really pronounced thing that Clinton did when he took office?
Oh, wait, was that the don't ask, don't tell thing? Or?
No.
That wasn't,
What? Oh, yeah, sorry, did you say Don't Ask, Don't Tell? I thought you said Johannesburg. Yes, yeah, no, it was, what's Johannesburg? Yes, exactly, it was the gays in military. You know, seemingly a small step. But most of when you look back at what the Clinton administration accomplished, outside of the deficit reduction, which had a lot to do with the economy, there aren't things that stick out. And you know, to your point, he backed down and said, I'm going to make day-to-day changes. I'm going to kind of try to make things better. 3 strikes, you know, on the welfare things like that. That it's hard even to remember that he did, except that it was an era of prosperity. And I think the difficulty for Obama is that he came in on such a, you know, a huge rhetorical and emotional high. It may be harder for him to back down from that. I mean, and I know this would never be a favorite in this class, and I will say I'm a liberal Democrat myself, but Drudge had a hilarious, after the Copenhagen failure, he had a hilarious headline, which the headline was "The Ego Has Landed," and there is some way he has to figure out how to move now. And I agree. What he's probably going to do is piecemeal health care. But take Afghanistan. This is really, to me, the most important problem, tactical strategic problem. If he doesn't go forward with the troop increase, he's probably going to have a bunch of generals resign, and basically, from what we know in the community, he will start to lose the faith of the people who've been feeding him information. You probably noticed that it's kind of these days, as soon as the Taliban or the Al Qaeda appoint a new leader, you know, we take him out within a week or so. Because we've got incredible intelligence now, because they trust us. The villagers are coming to trust us that we're going to stay there and we're going to be there, and we have commitment. Not sending the troops would send a message that we're on the edge of backing out, and the intelligence would probably reverse on that. But as you know, saying yes to 45,000 new troops alienates an enormous part of Obama's constituency within Congress. And it really is. It's one of those things, you know, it's truly, as one person put it, the choice is between you know, a disaster and a catastrophe, except you don't know which one's which at this point. So it's an incredibly tough position for the president to be in. Yes?
To go back to your earlier question, it seems to me that the danger of Republicans taking over the House and the Senate is overblown for a whole bunch of structural reasons. And even though Obama was less popular than he was when he came to office, he's still a lot more popular than Republican, the general Democratic Party is much more popular than the Republican Party is. And it seems as if you look at the way that the campaign worked, Obama had a kind of steadiness in the face of adversity that some of the people around him, or at least people before him, didn't. This might be another case right now while he's in administration. I think what he could use, though, is an opponent to demonize. I mean, it's not his style to do that, but insofar as this is a story that's going to go on for a while where he's not going to, you know, achieve everything that he promised initially, it would be helpful if, for example, he said the insurance companies are to blame for healthcare not being passed as well as it could be, or something like that. And insofar as the story is probably going to be lasting for several years, he won't be taking the blame for everything that doesn't happen the way that he promised. So I think this would make the story more compelling to people.
That's a really good point, and I do think that the structural issue that you're referring to is that the Republicans need to win 40 seats in order to take control of the House, which is a lot, but the current polling shows them at about 20 to 25, and it's just, you know, as you know, Pelosi's having a hard enough time keeping control with a 40-seat majority. But you're right. I think the chance of them taking over are small. But he has to, and you're also right to say, you're so early. People are saying, you know, it's over, blah blah. It's ridiculous. You know, he's 8 months into the presidency. He's got a lot of time to recover. But he has to retool. He has to, in a sense, you know, he's like the GM executives who, you know, came to the first hearing on bailout in their jets, which didn't go over all that well. and he's got to now figure out how to come back. And you know, driving a Prius probably isn't the way to do it. But he does have to figure out a way to get some, to your point, some concrete victories here relatively quickly where he can take credit. I mean, the Copenhagen thing was obviously a PR disaster, but short-lived. Who cares? The fact he's getting wrapped up in the Letterman scandal, I think, is really a problem for him. But you know, he'll probably work his way out of that.
Well, you know, the large issue, the Constitution is working almost exactly the way James Madison and the guys wanted it to work.
You mean against black people?
No, not. You can dress him up, you just can't take him out in public. No, it is what they meant by the mischief of faction was putting together a coalition to change the economic status quo in any large way and shoving it down the throats of those who don't like it. And the Constitution really does favor people playing defense on economic issues.
Yep.
And healthcare is, if there ever was an economic issue, that's what it is. And so the advice might be, your advice is find some sliver of it that you can palm off as a solution and declare victory.
Yeah, and I think the demonization problem is, you know, a lot of the Democrats, as you I'm sure know, the biggest, recipient of health care contributions is Max Baucus, you know, who's the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. So he has a hard time demonizing that group for that reason. A lot of Democrats take a lot of money from those people right now. But you're right, finding a demon would be fantastic. If Sarah Palin were more credible, it would be perfect.
So we've got 2 minutes here. American capitalism.
I'm against it.
You're against it, I can tell. You're against it for everyone else.
Right.
These people are reading a dreary book by Richard Posner about the depression of 2008. And a call from Posner is one of the most conservative federal judges of all. I mean, he's way out there on the pro-market side of every controversy. And yet here's a book saying we got to have more regulation. Where are you on that?
I'm a huge fan of more regulation on these fronts. I think hedge funds need to be regulated at this point, and they need to be regulated in ways that any hedge fund that's doing its real job can survive. You know, it's a cost. You're going to add some cost, big deal. The point is you need to save. The hedge fund industry, by the way, is the only industry that took not one dime from the federal government during this entire situation. But it's only a matter of time that before the leverage and the practices get to the point where we create a problem in the hedge fund industry. So I think leverage is, to me, if you had to say one thing, and I think the government, by the way, is doing an unbelievable job of taking its time. I was really afraid that it was going to rush into regulation before we really understood what happened. And just one quick thing, leverage, and I don't mean leverage like 10 times leverage. I mean leverage like the 1,000-time leverage that you need to do to create these mathematic programs where you make a 1/100th of 1 cent on each transaction that you're theoretically completely that you're completely balanced in the market on. You can't make those trades unless you can leverage at that kind of level. So somewhere between 50 and 1,000 is where the leverage limit is going to be set. And the second thing, one thing, we're going to have to get down to the rating agencies. And there's a lot of problem in that, a lot of political problems in that, but at some point we have to get down to what happened with the rating agencies and why they failed to act the way they were supposed to.
Richard, as always, this has been absolutely fascinating, and we thank you very much.